The night Caleb Mercer's ex-wife publicly mocked him at Manhattan's most exclusive gala, she had no idea the worn ring on his finger was worth more than her new fiancé's entire portfolio. What began as a humiliating ambush in front of New York's elite became the moment a broken single father finally stopped apologizing for surviving. This is the story of one man, one hidden legacy, and the woman powerful enough to change everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The courthouse on Center Street emptied slowly that Tuesday evening, its marble floors echoing with the footsteps of people whose lives had just been legally dismantled. Caleb Mercer stood on the steps outside, watching his breath fog in the February air, trying to remember when Manhattan had ever felt this cold. The folder in his left hand contained 63 pages of dissolution, custody arrangements, asset divisions, and the formal end of 8 years that once felt permanent. In his right hand, he held his grandfather's ring, the one object he'd refused to surrender during the settlement negotiations. His ex-wife, Vanessa, had demanded it, called it marital property. Her lawyer had actually laughed when Caleb insisted on keeping it, like watching a drowning man cling to driftwood. But Judge Martinez had ruled in Caleb's favor, family heirloom, predating the marriage, sentimentally irreplaceable. Vanessa's expression when the gavel fell had been pure venom. "You can keep your cheap nostalgia," she'd said in the hallway afterward, her voice low enough that their attorneys couldn't quite hear. "It suits you, clinging to the past while the rest of us move forward." Caleb hadn't responded. What was there to say? That he'd spent 3 years watching their marriage corrode while he worked 60-hour weeks trying to keep their family afloat? That she'd fallen into the arms of Marcus Hastings, venture capitalist, golf club regular, everything Caleb would never be, while Caleb was teaching their daughter to read? He said nothing. Just watched Vanessa walk away in her tailored coat, Marcus's hand on the small of her back, her heels clicking toward a life that no longer included the man who'd once promised her everything. The ring felt heavy against his palm. Simple gold band, worn smooth by 3 generations. His grandfather had given it to him the week before he died, pressed it into Caleb's hand with fingers that trembled from the cancer eating through his bones. "This belonged to my father," the old man had whispered, "and his father before him. It's seen harder times than you'll ever know, boy. Don't you dare give up on yourself." Caleb slipped it onto his right ring finger. The left still felt wrong, even 6 months after removing his wedding band, and pulled his coat tighter against the wind. The subway ride back to Washington Heights took 40 minutes, enough time to mentally calculate the damage. Rent was due in 8 days, $2,100 for an apartment barely big enough for him and his daughter. Utility bills stacked on the counter. Student loans from the graduate degree that was supposed to launch his career but instead left him qualified for jobs that didn't exist. And Lily's preschool tuition, the one expense he refused to compromise on, no matter how tight things got. He'd started the community housing program 3 years ago, back when he still believed hard work and good intentions could change systems. The idea was simple: connect displaced families with temporary housing while helping them navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of permanent placement. He'd run it from a borrowed office in a church basement, survived on grant applications and the occasional small donation, told himself he was making a difference. Then Vanessa left, and suddenly survival became more urgent than purpose. The apartment was dark when he unlocked the door, except for the nightlight in Lily's room, a plastic moon that cast soft blue shadows across her sleeping face. She was 4 years old, still young enough to believe her daddy could fix anything, still innocent of the financial calculations that kept Caleb awake most nights. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the weight of every choice that had led him here. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Caleb almost ignored it, probably another creditor, another polite reminder that he was drowning, but something made him check. The message was brief. Caleb Mercer, you are invited to the Ashford Foundation Winter Gala, February 18th, 7 p.m., the Plaza Hotel. Formal attire required. Your work has not gone unnoticed. N.A. Caleb read it 3 times. Naomi Ashford. He'd never met her personally, but everyone in nonprofit circles knew the name. Youngest CEO in her company's history, self-made billionaire by 35, philanthropist whose foundation had quietly revolutionized community development across 3 continents. 6 months ago, the Ashford Foundation had started funding Caleb's housing program. Not the whole operation, but enough to keep the lights on, enough to help 24 families find stable ground. The grants came through intermediaries. Caleb had written thank you letters to an administrative office. He'd assumed someone on Naomi Ashford's staff had noticed his work the way wealthy people notice causes, distantly, charitably, without personal investment. But this message felt different, personal, direct. His phone buzzed again. "Where the ring?" Caleb stared at the screen, then at his hand. The worn gold band caught the dim light from Lily's nightlight. How did Naomi Ashford know about his grandfather's ring? He spent the next morning doing what any rational person would do when handed an impossible invitation, trying to find excuses not to go. The gala was in 4 days. He didn't own formal attire. His only suit was a 10-year-old navy blazer he'd worn to job interviews, and it barely fit anymore. He didn't know anyone who'd be attending. He was a single father running a shoestring nonprofit from a basement office, not the kind of person who belonged beneath crystal chandeliers at the plaza. And yet, your work has not gone unnoticed. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, really a folding card table that wobbled unless you positioned it exactly right, and opened his laptop. A quick search for Ashford Foundation Winter Gala returned dozens of results. Society page coverage from previous years, photos of Manhattan's elite in designer gowns and tuxedos, guest lists that read like a Forbes index. The event wasn't just fundraising, it was theater, a performance of power and influence, where deals happen in side conversations and reputations, shifted based on who stood next to whom. Caleb had no business being there. He was about to close the laptop when a headline caught his eye. Naomi Ashford champions community-based housing at annual foundation summit. The article was 3 weeks old. He clicked through. Ashford emphasized the importance of grassroots programs that prioritize dignity over bureaucracy. The most effective work happens at street level, she told the audience of investors and philanthropists. People like Caleb Mercer, who run programs that treat housing as a human right rather than a market commodity. Those are the initiatives worth funding. Caleb's heart kicked hard against his ribs. She'd said his name, in front of investors, in front of people who could fund his program for the next decade without blinking. His phone rang. Lena Ortiz, his only full-time staff member, and the person who actually kept the housing program functional while Caleb dealt with existential crises. "Please tell me you saw the Ashford thing," Lena said without preamble. "I'm looking at it right now." "Caleb, do you understand what this means? Naomi Ashford doesn't mention people by name unless she's serious. If you've got an invitation to that gala, I do." Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you absolutely kidding me right now? Got the message last night. And you're going, right? Tell me you're going." Caleb rubbed his eyes. "Lena, I can't just show up at the plaza like I belong there. I don't even own the right clothes. So rent them, borrow them. I don't care if you show up in a garbage bag, Caleb. You cannot miss this. Do you know how many programs would kill for 30 seconds of Naomi Ashford's attention? She invited you personally. That's not luck. That's recognition. She also told me to wear my grandfather's ring." Another pause. "What?" "Second message, just 2 words. Wear the ring." "Okay, that's weird, but also intriguing. Do you know why she'd—" "No idea." Lena exhaled slowly. "Look, I know the divorce cleaned you out. I know Vanessa took everything that wasn't nailed down. And I know you're living on ramen and spite right now. But this is bigger than your comfort zone. This is the future of the program. Our families depend on this." She wasn't wrong. 23 families currently housed through their program, 50 more on the waiting list. If Caleb could secure even a fraction more funding, if he could convince Naomi Ashford's network that community housing deserved serious investment, "I'll think about it," he said. "You'll do more than think. You'll go. And you'll wear that ring even if you have no idea why." After they hung up, Caleb sat in the quiet apartment, listening to Lily sing to herself in the next room. Some made-up song about butterflies. 4 years old, and she'd already learned to entertain herself while Daddy worked through his failures. He picked up his phone and texted the unknown number. "Why the ring?" The response came 3 minutes later. "Because it's time people saw what you're really worth. N.A." The next 2 days blurred into frantic preparation. Lena connected him with a friend who worked costume rentals for off-Broadway shows. Caleb walked out with a tuxedo that almost fit, only slightly shiny at the elbows. He borrowed dress shoes from his neighbor, a retired professor who asked no questions and offered quiet encouragement. He got a haircut from the discount place on Amsterdam Avenue, sat in the chair trying not to think about the fact that he was spending money he didn't have on an event that might lead nowhere. The ring stayed on his finger the entire time. Caleb had started researching it the morning after receiving Naomi's messages. His grandfather had never explained its history beyond vague references to the family and harder times. Caleb had always assumed it was sentimentally valuable but materially worthless, just old gold, worn smooth by decades of work and worry. But when he took it to a jeweler in the Diamond District, a tiny shop wedged between currency exchanges and watch repair places, the old man behind the counter had gone very still. "Where did you get this?" he'd asked, voice careful. "My grandfather. Why?" The jeweler pulled out a loupe, examined the inner band for a long moment. "This is Cartier, pre-war. See this hallmark? They stopped using this maker's mark in 1938. And this setting..." He looked up at Caleb, reassessing. "You know what you have here?" "No. This isn't just gold. This is history. Pieces like this, if they're authenticated, if the provenance is clear..." The jeweler shook his head slowly. "You're looking at 6 figures, maybe more." Caleb had walked out of the shop in a daze. 6 figures. He'd been wearing a fortune on his hand while eating dollar store pasta, while dodging creditor calls, while wondering if he'd have to move Lily into a smaller apartment because he couldn't make rent. And Naomi Ashford knew. Somehow, she knew exactly what the ring was worth, exactly what it represented. The question that kept Caleb awake the night before the gala wasn't how she knew. Wealthy people had resources beyond his comprehension. The question was why she cared. What? The Plaza Hotel on a Friday evening in February looked like a palace imported from another century. Caleb emerged from the subway at 59th Street and walked the final block slowly, watching limousines discharge passengers in gowns that probably cost more than his annual salary. Doormen in white gloves, red carpet despite the cold, camera flashes from photographers positioned behind velvet ropes. He almost turned around 3 times, but Lena's words kept echoing. "This is bigger than your comfort zone." And beneath that, quieter but more insistent. "You're looking at 6 figures. Maybe more." If the ring was really worth what the jeweler claimed, Caleb could secure Lily's future, could expand the housing program, could finally stop feeling like he was one missed paycheck away from total collapse. He handed his invitation to the attendant at the door, a young woman in a sharp suit who scanned it, nodded, and gestured him inside without the skeptical once-over he'd been expecting. The ballroom was excessive in the way only old money could achieve. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, tables set with china that reflected candlelight like small moons. 500 people, maybe more, all moving through practiced choreography of wealth and influence. Conversations that sounded casual but determined who got funded, who got promoted, who mattered. Caleb accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter and positioned himself near a column, trying to look purposeful rather than lost. "You came." The voice was low, controlled, unmistakably feminine. Caleb turned. Naomi Ashford was smaller than he'd expected from her photographs, maybe 5'6" in heels, but she carried herself with the kind of presence that made height irrelevant. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a precise bun, wearing a midnight blue gown that managed to be both elegant and severe. Her eyes, sharp, assessing, met his without hesitation. "Ms. Ashford," Caleb managed. "Naomi, please." She extended a hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "I'm glad you decided to accept the invitation. Not everyone does." "I almost didn't." "I know." A slight smile. "But you wore the ring." Caleb glanced down at his hand, the gold band catching the chandelier light. "You knew what it was." "I know what it represents." Naomi gestured toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Walk with me." They moved through the crowd, Naomi nodding at various guests but not stopping. People noticed her. Everyone noticed her, but she navigated the attention with practiced efficiency, creating a bubble of privacy even in the middle of chaos. "Your grandfather," she said quietly. "With Samuel Mercer." Caleb stopped walking. "You knew him?" "Not personally, but I knew of him. He worked construction in Brooklyn for 40 years, helped build half the affordable housing projects in Sunset Park during the 60s and 70s, died 3 years ago, cancer." "How do you Because I do my research, Caleb. When I fund a program, I learn everything about the person running it. And when I learned about you, about your grandfather, about the ring—" She paused, turning to face him fully. "I realized you didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Naomi's expression softened slightly. "That ring belonged to Henri Mercier, your great-great-grandfather. He was a master jeweler in Paris before the war. When the Nazis occupied France, he fled with his family and a handful of pieces he'd managed to hide. That ring was one of them. It's been passed down through your family for 3 generations, but somewhere along the way, the story got lost." Caleb felt the room tilt slightly. "My grandfather never said," because he probably didn't know the full history either, "but the ring is documented. Cartier has records. There's a private collector in Geneva who's been trying to track it down for 20 years. Naomi's voice dropped. "What you're wearing is worth approximately $850,000. The champagne flute nearly slipped from Caleb's hand. "That's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "More than you expected," Naomi finished, "but also exactly why I invited you here. Not because of the ring's monetary value, though that's significant, but because of what it represents. Your family survived impossible circumstances. They built lives from nothing, and you're doing the same thing with your housing program. You're creating stability for people who've been told they don't deserve it." Caleb stared at her. "Why do you care?" "Because I was one of those people once." Naomi's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her voice. 16 years old, sleeping in my car because my mother's boyfriend decided I was too expensive to keep around. I know what it's like when the systems that are supposed to help you treat you like a problem to be managed. So when I see someone actually doing the work, not performing charity, but building genuine solutions, I pay attention." Around them, the gala continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, the soft sound of a string quartet. But in their corner, the world had narrowed to just this conversation. "I still don't understand why I'm here," Caleb said. "You're here because I want these people," Naomi gestured subtly toward the ballroom, "to see you, to know your name, to understand that community housing isn't a side project or a tax write-off. It's the future, and you're going to help me convince them." Before Caleb could respond, a voice cut through the conversation. "Well, this is unexpected." Caleb turned. His stomach dropped. Vanessa stood 10 feet away, Marcus Hastings beside her. She wore an emerald dress that probably cost more than 3 months of Caleb's rent, her hair styled into perfect waves, her expression a mixture of surprise and something uglier. "Vanessa," Caleb said evenly, "I didn't realize you'd expanded your social circle." Her eyes flicked to Naomi, recognition dawning. "Ms. Ashford, what a lovely event." "Thank you." Naomi's tone was polite but arctic. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "Immensely." Vanessa's gaze returned to Caleb, assessing him like he was a stain on expensive upholstery. "Though I have to admit, I'm surprised to see Caleb here. This isn't exactly his usual scene." Marcus, tall, silver-haired, insufferably confident, extended a hand. "Marcus Hastings. I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," Caleb said, not taking the hand. An awkward pause. Vanessa's smile sharpened. "Caleb runs a little charity program, very grassroots. I'm sure it keeps him busy." "It's a community housing initiative," Naomi said quietly, "one of the most effective in the city, which is why I invited him." Vanessa's expression flickered, just for a second, but Caleb caught it. Surprise, maybe even a flash of uncertainty. "How charitable of you," Vanessa said, recovering. "Supporting struggling programs, it's important to give back." "It's not charity," Naomi replied. "It's investment. There's a difference." The tension crystallized. Marcus, sensing the shift, tried to redirect. "Well, we should let you get back to your evening. Vanessa, darling, I think Judge Morrison wanted to speak with you." But Vanessa wasn't done. Her eyes fixed on Caleb's hand, on the ring. "You're still wearing that?" She laughed. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive. "I can't believe you fought so hard to keep Grandpa's old wedding band. What's it worth, Caleb? Sentimental value and maybe 200 at a pawn shop? Caleb said nothing. Naomi, however, tilted her head slightly. Actually, she said, voice calm, that ring is a documented Cartier heirloom from 1936. Current market value is approximately $850,000, give or take. The silence that followed was profound. Vanessa's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, then something that looked like rage barely contained beneath social propriety. That's not, she started. It is, Naomi said, authenticated, documented. I have the provenance paperwork if you'd like to review it. Marcus had gone very still. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. Around them, several nearby conversations had quieted, people sensing drama. I think, Marcus said carefully, there might be some confusion. No confusion, Caleb said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Just information you didn't have. Vanessa's eyes blazed. If that ring is actually worth, during our marriage, that was marital property. The settlement specifically excluded family heirlooms predating the marriage, Naomi finished, which Judge Martinez ruled on. Legally binding, but I'm sure your attorney explained that. The crowd around them had grown. Not obviously, these were people trained in discretion, but Caleb could feel the attention shifting their direction. Phones coming out of pockets. Whispered conversations. Vanessa took a step closer to Caleb, lowering her voice to something venomous. You think this changes anything? You think wearing expensive jewelry makes you less of a failure? You're still the same man who couldn't provide for his family. Still the same man I had to leave because you were too busy saving strangers to save your own marriage. And there it was. The accusation Caleb had been carrying for 6 months. The guilt that woke him at 3 a.m., wondering if she was right. He met her eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. I spent years building something that mattered while you decided it wasn't enough. And you're right. I couldn't save our marriage because I was too busy making sure our daughter had food and rent and a father who showed up. Don't you dare it! I'm not done. Caleb's voice stayed level, but something had shifted. You want to call me a failure? Fine. I've failed at a lot. But I've never failed Lily. And I've never failed the families depending on me. So if that makes me unsuccessful in your eyes, I can live with that. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Marcus touched her elbow, trying to guide her away, but she shook him off. This is pathetic, she hissed. You standing here pretending you belong, wearing a ring you didn't even know was valuable, acting like you've accomplished something. You're still broke, Caleb. You're still barely surviving. And one expensive piece of jewelry doesn't change that. You're right, Naomi said, stepping forward. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. One ring doesn't change anything. But it does reveal something interesting about character. Caleb spent 3 years building a program that's housed over 50 families. He did it with almost no resources, no recognition, and no expectation of reward. He kept your daughter fed and safe while you were deciding he wasn't profitable enough to love. And when he finally gets invited to an event recognizing that work, you show up to remind him he's not good enough. The ballroom had gone very quiet. The ring, Naomi continued, isn't what makes Caleb valuable. It's just proof that value comes in forms people like you refuse to see. Vanessa's composure cracked. Who the hell do you think? I think, Naomi said calmly, that you've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening. And I think Caleb has better things to do than watch you perform regret. For a long moment, Vanessa just stood there, trembling with rage or humiliation, or both. Then Marcus finally succeeded in pulling her away, murmuring something about needing air, and they disappeared into the crowd. Caleb exhaled slowly, his hands were shaking. I'm sorry, he said to Naomi. I didn't mean to cause Joe. Don't apologize. Her expression was fierce. Not for existing in a space you were invited to, not for defending yourself, and definitely not for her inability to see what she had. The crowd was dispersing now. The drama concluded, but Caleb could feel eyes on him. Not all hostile, some curious, some reassessing. A man in an expensive suit approached, older, silver beard, commanding presence. Naomi, I hope I'm not interrupting. David, Naomi's demeanor shifted back to professional warmth. Perfect timing. I wanted you to meet Caleb Mercer. He runs the community housing program I mentioned during last quarter's board meeting. David extended a hand. David Kensington. I oversee the Kensington Trust. We focus on urban development. I'd love to hear more about your work. And just like that, the evening pivoted. For the next 2 hours, Caleb found himself in conversation after conversation. Donors who'd read about his program, foundation directors looking for effective partnerships, a journalist from the Times who wanted to do a feature. Naomi stayed nearby, not hovering, but present, a subtle signal that Caleb was worth their attention. He talked about the families he'd helped, the bureaucratic failures he'd had to navigate, the vision for expanding the program if resources allowed. And people listened. Actually, listened. By the time the gala wound down, Caleb's head was spinning. Naomi found him near the coat check. You did well. I'm not sure what just happened. You stopped apologizing for taking up space. She handed him a business card, heavy stock, embossed lettering. Call my office Monday. We need to discuss next steps. Next steps? The ring connects you to a family trust. It's complicated, legal documentation, authentication processes. But there's money there. Enough to secure your daughter's future and fund your program for the next 5 years, maybe more. Caleb stared at the card. I don't understand why you're doing this. Because someone did it for me once. Because the systems are designed to keep people like us invisible. And because you're doing the work that actually matters. Naomi's expression softened. Also, because watching your ex-wife's face when she realized what that ring was worth, that was extremely satisfying. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. Outside, Manhattan had warmed slightly. Snow was starting to fall, small tentative flakes that melted on contact with the pavement. Caleb stood on the steps of the plaza, watching limousines depart, feeling the weight of the evening settle. His phone buzzed. Lena. Tell me everything. He smiled and typed back, tomorrow. But it was significant. The subway ride home took forever. Caleb sat in the mostly empty car, staring at the ring on his hand, trying to process the fact that his entire life had just shifted. Not because of the money, though that mattered desperately, but because, for the first time in years, someone had seen him. Not as a struggling ex-husband or a charity case or a man failing to meet expectations, just as someone doing work that deserved recognition. When he got home, Lily was asleep, her babysitter dozing on the couch. He paid her, thanked her, and stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her breathe. We're going to be okay, he whispered. I promise. The ring caught the dim light. Henri Mercier's legacy, Samuel Mercer's inheritance, and now Caleb's responsibility. He wasn't fixed. The divorce still hurt. The bills were still real. Vanessa's words still echoed. But for the first time since signing those papers, Caleb felt like he wasn't drowning. He was standing, finally, steadily standing, and from that solid ground, he could build something that lasted. The morning after this gala arrived with the kind of brutal clarity that only comes after nights that change everything. Caleb woke at 6:30 to Lily jumping on his bed, her small hands shaking his shoulder with the determined enthusiasm of a child who had no concept of hangovers or existential recalibration. Daddy, you promised pancakes, she announced, her dark curls bouncing as she climbed over him. You said Saturday means pancakes, Caleb groaned, pulling her into a hug that made her squeal. I did say that, didn't I? You did, so get up. In the kitchen, while Lily colored at the card table and Caleb measured flour with hands that still felt unsteady, his phone erupted. Text messages, missed calls, notifications piling up like snow. Lena had texted 17 times. His cousin in Baltimore wanted to know why someone had tagged Caleb in a society page photo. Even his mother, who communicated primarily through sporadic emails about church bake sales, had called twice. The Times article had posted overnight. Not a full feature, just a brief mention in their coverage of the Ashford Gala, but there it was. Community housing advocate Caleb Mercer, whose grassroots program has quietly revolutionized placement protocols in Upper Manhattan, was among the evening's notable attendees. Mercer, recently divorced and operating on a shoestring budget, represents the kind of ground-level innovation Ashford's foundation has increasingly prioritized. Caleb read it 3 times while the pancakes burned. Daddy, it's smoking, Lily observed calmly. He scraped the blackened mess into the trash and started over, trying to ignore the way his heart was racing. The article hadn't mentioned the ring, hadn't detailed the confrontation with Vanessa, but the implication was clear. Caleb Mercer mattered. His work mattered. People were paying attention. His phone rang. Naomi Ashford. "Good morning," she said without preamble. "I hope you slept well." "Not really." Caleb flipped a pancake one-handed. "I kept thinking I'd wake up, and yesterday would turn out to be a very specific kind of anxiety dream." It wasn't. Papers rustled on her end. "I'm sending over contact information for Martin Vreeland. He's an estate attorney who specializes in legacy inheritances and international provenance documentation. You'll need him to navigate the trust situation." "Naomi, I still don't fully understand. The ring connects you to assets your great-great-grandfather secured before fleeing France. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. However, accessing those funds requires proper legal channels, especially given the time elapsed and the complexity of wartime property law. Martin can handle it." Caleb poured batter into the pan, watching it bubble. "And this is real? Not some elaborate mistake?" "Caleb?" Her voice softened slightly. "I don't make mistakes about things like this. The documentation exists. Your family's history exists. What happens next depends on whether you're willing to claim it." "What does that mean?" "It means you have to decide who you are. The man who apologizes for existing, or the man who builds something that lasts." A pause. "Call Martin on Monday. And Caleb, don't let anyone convince you this is charity. You earned every bit of recognition you received last night." After she hung up, Caleb stood in the small kitchen, spatula in hand, trying to reconcile the conversation with the reality of his daughter eating cereal because he'd burned breakfast, with the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, with the cramped apartment that still smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cigarette smoke. "Daddy, are you okay?" Lily asked, her mouth ringed with milk. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm okay." "You look funny." "Just thinking." "About what?" Caleb set down the spatula and crouched beside her chair. "About how sometimes things change really fast, and how we have to be brave when they do." Lily considered this seriously. "Like when Mommy moved away?" The question hit harder than it should have. "Yeah, like that. Are you being brave?" "I'm trying to be." She patted his cheek with her small hand. "You're good at trying." The pancakes turned out acceptable on the third attempt. They ate together at the wobbly card table, Lily chattering about her preschool friend Maya, who apparently had a pet turtle, while Caleb scrolled through messages and tried to process the fact that his life had fractured into before and after. Lena arrived at 9, letting herself in with the spare key Caleb had given her for emergencies. She carried coffee from the good place on Broadway and a manic energy that filled the small apartment immediately. "Okay," she said, thrusting a cup at Caleb. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. What happened after you walked in?" Caleb glanced at Lily, who was now building a tower with blocks in the corner. "Maybe later." "Lily, honey," Lena said, pulling a tablet from her bag. "I downloaded that new butterfly game you wanted. Want to play in your room for a bit?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? 20 minutes, go." Once Lily had disappeared, Lena turned to Caleb with an expression that suggested she might physically shake him if he didn't start talking. He told her everything. The conversation with Naomi, the ring's actual value, Vanessa's appearance and the confrontation that followed, the conversations with donors and foundation directors, the times mention, the phone call that morning about estate attorneys and family trusts. Lena listened without interrupting, her coffee going cold in her hands. When Caleb finished, she set down the cup very carefully. $850,000. Apparently. For a ring your grandfather gave you that you almost pawned last year when rent was overdue. "I didn't almost pawn it. You looked up pawn shops, Caleb. I saw your browser history." He had no defense for that. It was a low moment. "And now you're potentially connected to a family trust that could fund the program for 5 years. Lena's voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. "Do you understand what this means? We could hire actual staff, get a real office, expand beyond Manhattan, actually help people, instead of constantly triaging crises. If it's real, if the legal stuff works out, if I don't somehow screw this up, stop that." Lena's tone sharpened. "Stop waiting for permission to succeed. Naomi Ashford doesn't back losers. If she says there's money there, there's money there. Your only job now is to not sabotage yourself out of fear. Caleb wanted to argue, to list all the ways this could collapse, but his phone interrupted. Unknown number, New York area code. Mr. Mercer? The voice was clipped, professional. This is Martin Vreeland. Naomi Ashford asked me to reach out regarding your family's estate situation. Do you have time to discuss preliminary details? Caleb looked at Lena, who was watching him with an expression that clearly said, "Answer the damn phone." "Yes," he said. "I have time." Martin Vreeland spoke for 20 minutes, explaining concepts that sounded like they belonged in a legal thriller. International property law, wartime asset documentation, authentication processes for historical claims. Caleb understood maybe half of it, but the core message was clear. Henri Mercier had established a small trust before fleeing Paris, intending it to support his descendants. The money had been frozen during the war, lost in bureaucratic limbo for decades. But recent changes in French restitution law had made recovery possible. The challenge, Martin explained, is proving lineage and establishing clear ownership of authenticated pieces. The ring is our primary evidence. If the Cartier documentation holds, and Naomi seems confident it will, you're looking at access to approximately $2.3 million in assets. After legal fees and taxes, probably $1.7 million net. Caleb sat down hard on the couch. Lena, who had been shamelessly eavesdropping, grabbed his shoulder to steady him. That's... Caleb couldn't finish the sentence. Significant, Martin agreed. But not immediate. This process takes time. Probably 6 to 8 months, possibly longer if we encounter complications. In the meantime, I'd recommend you continue operating normally. Don't make major financial decisions based on anticipated funds. Right, normal, sure. After the call ended, Caleb and Lena sat in silence for a long moment. From Lily's room came the sound of digital butterflies and her delighted laughter. 1.7 million, Lena finally said. After 8 months? Maybe longer, if everything goes perfectly. Still, 1.7 million. Caleb rubbed his face. I need to think. You need to act. First thing Monday, you're calling Martin back and starting the legal process. Second thing, you're meeting with me, and we're planning what this means for the program. Third thing, Lena. What? Can I just process this for like 5 minutes? She studied him, then nodded. 5 minutes. Then we plan. The weekend passed in a strange blur. Caleb took Lily to the park, pushed her on swings while his phone buzzed with messages from people he barely knew, offering congratulations or asking for meetings. He made dinner, spaghetti, Lily's favorite, and listened to her talk about school while his mind kept circling back to the number. 1.7 million. Enough to change everything. Enough to terrify him. Saturday night, after Lily fell asleep, Caleb pulled out the shoebox where he kept important documents. Birth certificates, lease agreements, the divorce settlement. At the bottom, in a faded envelope, he found what he was looking for. Photos of his grandfather. Samuel Mercer at 20, young and lean in construction clothes. Samuel at 40, holding Caleb's father as a baby. Samuel at 70, hands gnarled from decades of labor, standing in front of a building he'd helped construct. Caleb had never known his grandfather was carrying a fortune on his finger, had never known the ring represented survival and sacrifice and a family that refused to disappear. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered to the photos. But he knew the answer, because Samuel Mercer had measured wealth differently, in buildings that housed families, in work that mattered, in the ability to pass something meaningful to the next generation. The ring had never been about money. It had been about remembering who you were when the world tried to erase you. Sunday morning brought another complication. Caleb's phone rang at 8, Marcus Hastings. We need to talk, Marcus said without greeting, about the settlement. The settlement is finalized. There may be grounds for reconsideration. If assets were misrepresented during the divorce proceedings, the ring was documented as an heirloom. Judge Martinez ruled on it. Nothing was misrepresented. Caleb, be reasonable. If that ring is worth what people are saying, then it's worth exactly what it was worth when Vanessa tried to take it and failed. Caleb's voice stayed level. The settlement is done. Tell Vanessa she can't have it. This isn't about Vanessa. It's entirely about Vanessa. And the answer is no. He hung up, hands shaking slightly. The phone rang again immediately. He let it go to voicemail. Lena called 10 minutes later. Please tell me you didn't answer Marcus Hastings. I answered. Then I hung up. Good. He's going to push. Vanessa probably spent all weekend with lawyers trying to find an angle. Don't engage. Let Martin handle any legal challenges. There won't be legal challenges. The settlement is airtight. Caleb, people don't walk away from $800,000 without a fight, especially not people like Vanessa. She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, while Caleb was helping Lily build a blanket fort, his phone buzzed with an email from Vanessa's attorney. Professional language masking thinly veiled threats, concerns about full disclosure, requests for additional documentation, suggestions that good faith negotiations might avoid protracted legal disputes. Caleb forwarded it to Martin without responding. Martin replied within an hour. Standard intimidation tactics. Ignore completely. The settlement is ironclad. They're hoping you'll panic and negotiate. Don't. Monday morning arrived with the weight of decisions that couldn't be postponed any longer. Caleb dropped Lily at preschool, endured her teacher's curious questions about that article in the Times, and headed to the church basement office where the housing program operated. The space was depressing in daylight, water-stained ceiling tiles, mismatched furniture salvaged from curbs, a single window that overlooked an alley. Lena was already there, surrounded by intake files and a determination that radiated like heat. Okay, she said, pulling out a legal pad covered in notes. I've been thinking about scaling. If we get even a fraction of that trust money. Lena, we don't have the money yet. It could be 8 months, could be longer. So we plan for 8 months from now. We can't just keep reacting, Caleb. We need a strategy. She was right. But the idea of planning that far ahead felt presumptuous, like inviting disaster by assuming success. What are you thinking? He asked. Real office space, 3 full-time staff members, partnerships with existing housing agencies so we're not fighting the same bureaucratic battles over and over, a database system that actually works instead of my nightmare spreadsheet, and, she paused for emphasis, a salary for you that doesn't require eating ramen every night. The money should go to the program. The money should keep the program sustainable, which means paying the person who runs it. You can't help families if you're drowning yourself. Caleb opened his mouth to argue, but his phone rang. Naomi Ashford again. Morning, she said. Quick question. How do you feel about press? I try to avoid it generally. That's about to get harder. The Times wants to do a full feature. They're calling it The Invisible Infrastructure, one man's fight to fix New York's housing crisis. It's good publicity for the program. It's also going to invite scrutiny. Scrutiny you can handle. Caleb, you've been operating in the shadows because you thought that's where you belonged. But the work you're doing deserves visibility, and the families you help deserve advocates who aren't afraid to be seen. What if the visibility makes everything worse? Then you'll deal with it, but hiding hasn't protected you so far. Your ex-wife still tried to humiliate you. Your program still struggles for funding. Sometimes the only way forward is through the spotlight. After she hung up, Caleb looked at Lena. The Times wants to do a feature. Say yes. It's going to expose everything. The divorce, the financial situation. Vanessa is already trying to destroy you legally. At least with press coverage, you control the narrative. Lena leaned forward. Look, I know this is scary, but you have to decide. Do you want to keep surviving, or do you want to build something that lasts? Because those require different kinds of courage. The words echoed what Naomi had said, what his grandfather might have said, if he'd lived long enough to see this moment. Caleb pulled out his phone and texted Naomi. Tell the Times yes. Her response came immediately. Already did. They want to start interviews this week. The next 3 days felt like accelerating toward a cliff without brakes. The Times reporter, a woman named Jessica Chen, who had covered housing policy for a decade, spent 6 hours interviewing Caleb about the program's origins, the families they'd helped, the systemic failures they'd encountered. She was sharp, skeptical in the way good journalists are, asking questions that made Caleb uncomfortable. Your ex-wife claims you prioritized the program over your marriage, Jessica said during their second session. How do you respond to that? Caleb hesitated. I prioritized keeping our family stable. That meant working. Sometimes it meant working too much. Did the program contribute to your divorce? The program gave me purpose when everything else was falling apart. Whether that contributed to the divorce or resulted from it, I'm still not sure. Jessica made a note. Fair answer. She also interviewed Lena, 3 families currently housed through the program, and somehow got a statement from Vanessa's publicist that was pure poison disguised as concern. Ms. Mercer wishes her ex-husband well and hopes he's finally finding the stability he couldn't maintain during their marriage. When Caleb read the quote, he wanted to throw his phone through a wall. Don't react, Lena warned. That's what she wants. You respond with dignity and let the work speak for itself. The work doesn't defend me from character assassination. No, but the families you've helped do. The article published on Thursday morning, front page of the Metro section, with a photo of Caleb at the church basement office surrounded by intake files. The headline read, "Building Shelter from the Ground Up, How One Nonprofit is Quietly Solving What the City Can't." It was fair, unflinchingly fair. Jessica had included Vanessa's criticisms, Marcus's suggestions that Caleb had mismanaged finances, the fact that the program operated on a budget most agencies would consider laughable. But she'd also included testimony from Maria Gonzalez, a single mother who'd been homeless for 6 months before the program found her stable housing. From James Patterson, a veteran who'd been sleeping in shelters until Caleb connected him with permanent placement. The article didn't canonize Caleb. It showed him as he was, flawed, struggling, but doing the work anyway. His phone exploded. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Donation offers, interview requests, and one text from his mother. Your grandfather would be proud. Call me. He called her that evening, after Lily was asleep. I didn't know about the ring, his mother said without preamble. Your grandfather never told me it was valuable. He might not have known. He knew. Her voice was quiet. Samuel always knew more than he let on. He probably didn't want us to depend on it. Wanted us to build our own lives. I'm trying to. I know you are, baby. And I know the last year has been hard. But maybe this is the universe's way of saying you don't have to do it alone anymore. After they hung up, Caleb sat in the dark apartment thinking about what it meant to not do this alone, to accept help, to believe he deserved the opportunities appearing in front of him. Friday brought another call from Martin Vreeland. We've encountered our first complication. Caleb's stomach dropped. What kind? There's a claim from another descendant. Henri Mercier had 3 children. Your line comes through his daughter, Claire, but his son, Antoine, also had descendants. One of them, a woman named Margot Beaumont, living in Lyon, has filed paperwork claiming partial ownership of the trust. Can she do that? Legally, yes. The trust was established for Henri's descendants, plural. We'll need to prove your claim is primary, which means authenticating the ring and establishing clear lineage. It's not insurmountable, but it adds time and complexity. How much time? Could push us to a year, maybe longer. Caleb closed his eyes. And if her claim is stronger than mine, then you split the assets. But Caleb, you have the ring. Physical possession of an authenticated piece is significant in these cases. Don't panic yet. But panic was exactly what Caleb felt, the certainty that had been building since the Gala started crumbling. Of course there was a complication. Of course someone else had a claim. Of course the universe wouldn't just hand him stability without making him fight for every inch. He didn't tell Lena about the call. Didn't tell anyone. Just carried it like he carried everything else, quietly, internally, trying not to let the weight show. Saturday morning, Naomi Ashford showed up at his apartment unannounced. Caleb answered the door in sweatpants and a faded Columbia t-shirt, looking like he'd slept approximately 90 minutes. We need to talk, Naomi said, walking past him without invitation. Lily looked up from her coloring book, eyes wide. Who are you? I'm Naomi. You must be Lily. Daddy says I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. Smart rule. I'm not a stranger, though. I'm your dad's friend. But Lily considered this. Okay. Do you want to color? Maybe later. Naomi turned to Caleb. Kitchen? They left Lily with her crayons and stood in the cramped kitchen that still smelled like burnt coffee. Naomi looked around. taking in the chipped linoleum, the card table, the general atmosphere of barely managed survival, and her expression softened slightly. "Martin told me about the Lyon claim," she said. "How do you—" "Because I asked him to keep me updated. And before you get defensive about charity, this isn't that. This is me making sure someone I've invested in doesn't get crushed by legal complications. I can handle it." "Can you? Because you look like you haven't slept in 3 days." Caleb leaned against the counter. "I'm fine." "You're not. And that's okay. But you need to stop pretending you have to do this alone." Naomi pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then handed it to him. "This is Gerard Fontaine. He's a specialist in wartime restitution cases based in Paris. I've already spoken to him. He's willing to take your case." "Naomi, I can't afford—" "He works on contingency for cases with clear merit. You pay nothing unless you win. And Caleb? He wins." Caleb stared at the phone, at the lifeline being offered. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you. Someone helped me once. Now I'm returning the favor." "That's not the whole reason." Naomi met his eyes. "No, it's not. The whole reason is that I see what you're building, and I know how easily the world destroys people who try to build something real. I'm not going to let that happen if I can prevent it." Before Caleb could respond, Lily called from the other room, "Daddy, I'm hungry." Naomi smiled slightly. "Go take care of your daughter. Call Gerard on Monday. And Caleb, stop waiting for permission to accept help." She left before he could argue. Caleb stood in the kitchen, holding her phone number, feeling like the ground kept shifting beneath him in ways both terrifying and hopeful. That night, after Lily was asleep, he pulled up Gerard Fontaine's website. The man had handled dozens of restitution cases, recovered millions in assets for families displaced by the war. His success rate was remarkable. Caleb drafted an email 3 times before finally sending it. "Mr. Fontaine, Naomi Ashford suggested I reach out regarding a family trust claim. I'd like to discuss options if you have availability." The response came at 2 a.m. New York time. "Mr. Mercer, I've reviewed the preliminary documentation Naomi provided. Your case has merit. Let's discuss Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll send a video call link." Caleb read the message twice, then set down his phone and looked at the ring on his hand. Henri Mercier's legacy, Samuel Mercer's inheritance, and now his responsibility. For the first time since the gala, he let himself believe maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. The weekend ended with one final surprise. Sunday evening, a courier delivered a package to Caleb's apartment. Inside, a certified check for $50,000 and a note in Naomi's precise handwriting. "Bridge funding for the program while you sort the legal situation. Non-negotiable. Use it to hire staff, secure office space, and pay yourself a living wage. Consider it an investment in infrastructure." N. Caleb stared at the check until the numbers blurred. Lena was going to lose her mind. The families on their waiting list were going to get help. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Mercer was going to sleep without wondering how he'd make rent. He looked at Lily's closed door, at the ring on his hand, at the check that represented belief in what he was building. "Okay, Grandpa," he whispered. "I'm listening. I'm trying. I'm not giving up." The ring caught the dim light, silent and steady, and Caleb decided that was answer enough. Monday morning, Caleb deposited Naomi's check with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The bank teller, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who'd processed his overdraft fees more times than either of them wanted to acknowledge, looked at the amount and then at Caleb with undisguised shock. "Is this real?" she asked quietly. "Apparently." "Mr. Mercer, this changes things for you." "Yeah." Caleb managed a thin smile. "It really does." By the time he reached the church basement office, Lena had already heard. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression hovering between jubilation and fury. "You were going to tell me when exactly?" she demanded. "I'm telling you now. $50,000, Caleb, $50,000. And you just casually forgot to mention, I got the check last night. I'm mentioning it this morning. You want to yell at me or you want to figure out how to use it?" Lena's expression cracked into something that looked dangerously close to tears. We can actually hire people. We can actually hire people, Caleb confirmed. She pulled him into a hug that knocked the breath out of his lungs. Don't ever scare me like that again. I thought we were going to be eating ramen until the trust came through. We still might be. This is bridge funding. It runs out eventually. Then we make it count. Lena released him and pulled out her phone, already scrolling through notes. I've been drafting job descriptions for 2 weeks just in case. We need a case manager, an intake coordinator, and someone who actually understands database systems because my spreadsheet is held together with prayers and spite. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Real planning, not the desperate triage that had defined their work for years. Lena called her former colleague at the Department of Housing who'd been looking for nonprofit work. Caleb reached out to a social worker he'd met at a conference who specialized in family placement. By noon, they had interviews scheduled and a classified ad ready to post for the database position. At 1 o'clock, Caleb's phone rang. Gerard Fontaine calling from Paris. Mr. Mercer. The accent was thick, but the English precise. I have reviewed the documentation regarding your family's claim. We have work to do, but the foundation is solid. Caleb stepped outside into the February cold, needing air. Martin mentioned complications. Someone in Lyon. Margot Beaumont, yes, she is Henri Mercier's great-granddaughter through his son Antoine. Her claim is legitimate in the sense that she is family. However, her documentation is less substantial than yours. She has genealogical records, photographs, some letters. You have the ring. That's enough? In French restitution law, physical possession of authenticated artifacts carries significant weight. The ring proves direct lineage and continuity of family knowledge. But we must move quickly. Margot has retained aggressive counsel. They will attempt to discredit your claim by suggesting the ring was obtained improperly or that your family abandoned rights through long absence. Caleb's stomach tightened. Can they prove that? They can argue it. Our job is to establish clear chain of custody from Henri through your grandfather to you. I need documentation, birth certificates, marriage licenses, immigration records, anything connecting each generation. Can you provide this? I can try. My grandfather died 3 years ago. He wasn't big on keeping records. Then we dig. I have researchers who specialize in this work. It will take time and some expense, but Naomi has agreed to cover initial investigation costs. Of course she has, Caleb muttered. She believes in your case, so do I. But Mr. Mercer, you must understand, this will become public. French media will cover the restitution claim. Your personal life will be scrutinized. Are you prepared for that? Caleb thought about Vanessa's publicist, about the Times article, about the way his life had become involuntarily transparent over the past 2 weeks. I don't think I have a choice. We always have choices. The question is whether we have the courage to make them. After the call ended, Caleb stood on the sidewalk watching traffic, trying to absorb the fact that his grandfather's past was about to become international news. Henri Mercier, master jeweler, fleeing Nazi-occupied France with his family and whatever pieces he could hide. Claire Mercier arriving in New York with nothing but her father's tools and a few precious heirlooms. Samuel Mercer, building homes for working families while wearing a fortune on his finger without knowing it. And now Caleb, trying to prove he deserved what his ancestors had fought to preserve. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the message made his blood run cold. We should talk before this gets uglier. Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m., Café Grumpy on 20th. Don't bring lawyers. Vanessa. Caleb read it 3 times, each time feeling his anger rise. She had no right to demand his time, no right to insert herself into his life after spending 6 months making it clear he was insufficient. No right to anything except the custody schedule they'd agreed to. But beneath the anger was something sharper, curiosity. What could Vanessa possibly want to discuss that required a lawyer-free meeting? He texted back. Why? Her response came immediately. Because Marcus is pushing for legal action and I'm trying to prevent it. 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Caleb stared at the message. Every instinct screamed trap, but the mention of Marcus pushing for legal action made him hesitate. If Vanessa was genuinely trying to de-escalate, he typed, Fine, 10 a.m., 10 minutes. When he told Lena, her reaction was immediate and violent. Absolutely not. This is a setup. She's going to record you saying something incriminating and use it in court. She said no lawyers. She's lying. or Marcus is lying through her. Either way, you can't go alone. I'm not giving her the satisfaction of showing up with backup. 10 minutes in a public place. What's the worst that happens? You get manipulated into making concessions you don't have to make because she knows exactly how to get under your skin. Lena wasn't wrong, but Caleb was tired of making decisions based on fear of what Vanessa might do. I'll be careful. Caleb, I'll be careful, he repeated. And if she tries anything, I walk out. Tuesday morning arrived gray and bitter. Caleb dropped Lily at preschool early, endured her goodbye hug that felt like she somehow knew he was walking into something difficult, and headed downtown to the cafe Vanessa had specified. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee, looking polished and controlled in a way that reminded him of every argument they'd ever had. You came, she said as he sat down. You asked for 10 minutes, clock's running. Vanessa pushed one of the coffees toward him. It's how you used to take it. I don't know if that's changed. Caleb didn't touch it. What do you want, Vanessa? She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. I want to apologize. For what specifically? The divorce? The custody fight? Trying to take my grandfather's ring? Showing up at the gala to humiliate me? You're going to need to be more specific. For all of it. Her voice was quiet. For making you feel like you weren't enough. For leaving when things got hard instead of fighting to make it work. For not seeing what you were trying to build until it was too late to matter. Caleb felt something crack in his chest. You think an apology fixes this? No, but I think you deserve one anyway. Vanessa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Marcus wants to challenge the settlement. He's convinced there's a legal argument about undisclosed assets. He's already retained counsel. The ring was disclosed. Judge Martinez ruled on it. I know, but Marcus he's relentless when he thinks he's right. And he's convinced that if the ring is worth what people are saying, you should have gotten it appraised during the settlement proceedings. It was appraised as a family heirloom with sentimental value, which is what I believed it was. I know that too. Vanessa met his eyes. I'm telling you this because I'm not supporting his legal action. I told him to drop it. We fought about it. He thinks I'm being emotional instead of strategic. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been fighting alone for too long, and I'm tired of being the reason why. She took a breath. I was angry after the gala, embarrassed. I said things to Marcus about wanting to revisit the settlement, about how you'd hidden assets. I was wrong, and I'm trying to make it right before he does something we both regret. Caleb sat back, trying to process this version of Vanessa he barely recognized. What do you want from me? Nothing. I just wanted you to know that if Marcus files anything, it's not coming from me, and I'll testify that you disclosed everything honestly if it comes to that. Why would you do that? Because maybe I'm finally understanding what I gave up. Her voice cracked slightly. You were never going to make us rich, Caleb, but you were always going to show up. And I didn't value that until I was with someone who has all the money in the world and can't be bothered to show up for anything that matters. The silence that followed was complicated. Caleb wanted to be angry, to throw her apology back in her face, to make her feel even a fraction of what he'd felt signing those divorce papers. But underneath the anger was exhaustion. He was so tired of carrying this weight. I'm not taking you back, he said quietly. I know. And I'm not giving up the ring. I know that too. Then what are we doing here? Vanessa smiled sadly. I think I'm trying to make peace with the fact that I destroyed the best thing I had because I couldn't see its value until someone else did. Caleb stood up. I hope Marcus makes you happy, Vanessa. I really do. But I can't absolve you. That's not my job anymore. I know, but I needed to try. He left the coffee untouched and walked out into the cold morning, feeling like something had shifted but not sure yet what it meant. His phone rang before he'd gone 2 blocks. Martin Vreeland, voice tight with urgency. We have a problem. Marcus Hastings filed an emergency motion this morning challenging the settlement. He's claiming you committed fraud by concealing the ring's value. Vanessa just told me she's not supporting that. Doesn't matter. He filed it independently, claiming he has financial interest as her current partner. It's a reach, but it's going to require a response. We need to meet today. Caleb closed his eyes. When? My office. 2 p.m. Bring any documentation you have about the ring, when you got it, what you believed it was worth, anything that proves you acted in good faith. The meeting with Martin turned into 3 hours of legal strategy that made Caleb's head pound. The motion Marcus had filed was aggressive and largely baseless, but it would require court appearances, sworn testimony, possibly an independent appraisal of the ring, all of which would cost money Caleb didn't have and time he couldn't afford to lose. Can we countersue for harassment? Caleb asked. We can, but it prolongs the process and makes you look vindictive. Better strategy is to let the judge dismiss the motion for lack of standing. Marcus isn't a party to your divorce settlement. He has no grounds to challenge it. So we just wait for him to fail? We respond thoroughly, prove you disclosed everything properly, and let him hang himself with his own overreach. Martin leaned back in his chair. Caleb, I know this feels like you're under attack, but these kinds of desperate motions usually indicate someone knows they're losing. Marcus is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And if something sticks, it won't. Your disclosure was proper. Judge Martinez's ruling was sound. This is noise, not substance. Caleb wanted to believe that, but noise had a way of drowning out everything else. By the time he picked up Lily from preschool, he was running on fumes. She chattered about her day, something about finger painting and a boy named Sebastian who ate paste, while Caleb tried to focus on her words instead of the anxiety eating through his stomach. Daddy, you're not listening, Lily said, tugging his hand. I am, sweetheart. Sebastian ate paste. No, that was yesterday. Today he ate a crayon. That's concerning. Miss Jennifer said his mom is bringing him to the doctor. Lily swung his hand as they walked. Are you okay? You look sad. Just thinking about work stuff. Is work stuff hard? Sometimes. Do you need a hug? Caleb stopped walking and crouched down to her level. Yeah, actually, I really do. She threw her arms around his neck with the unselfconscious enthusiasm of 4-year-olds everywhere, and for a moment, the legal complications and media scrutiny and financial uncertainty all faded. This was what mattered, this small person who loved him unconditionally, who didn't care about family trusts or net worth or whether he belonged at fancy galas. I love you, Lily Bean, he whispered. Love you too, Daddy. Can we have pizza for dinner? Yeah, we can have pizza. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, researching everything he could find about French restitution law. Gerard had sent over preliminary documents, genealogical trees, property records, historical context about Jewish families fleeing occupied France. Henri Mercier had been Catholic, not Jewish, but the occupation had made refugees of anyone with something the Nazis wanted. The ring had been part of a collection Henri had spent decades building. Most of it had been seized or sold for survival money during the escape. Only a handful of pieces made it to New York, and even those had been sold over the years to pay for rent, food, medical bills. The ring had survived because Claire Mercier, Caleb's great-grandmother, had given it to her son Samuel as a wedding gift, asking him to pass it down. And Samuel had given it to Caleb with the simple instruction, don't give up. Caleb touched the ring, feeling the weight of all those choices. Henri choosing which pieces to save. Claire choosing which to keep. Samuel choosing who to trust with the legacy. Now it was Caleb's turn to choose what this meant. His phone buzzed. Naomi Ashford. Just heard about Marcus's motion, she said without preamble. How are you holding up? I've been better. Martin says it's frivolous. Martin says a lot of things. Doesn't make the process less exhausting. No, it doesn't. A pause. Are you free Thursday evening? Depends. Why? There's a dinner, small group, mostly foundation directors and a few key donors. I want you there. Naomi, I'm kind of drowning in legal drama right now, which is exactly why you need to be there. These people control funding pipelines. If they see you as stable, capable, worth investing in, it insulates you from whatever Marcus tries to do. Perception matters. I'm tired of performing for perception. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to show up. There's a difference. Her voice softened. Caleb, you're doing everything right. But you can't do it invisibly anymore. Let people see who you are. What if they don't like what they see? Then they're idiots and we move on. But I don't think that's going to happen. Caleb closed his laptop. What time Thursday? 7? The River Club. I'll send a car. I can take the subway. Caleb, let me send a car. Consider it a gift to my own sanity so I don't spend the evening wondering if you're lost in Queens. Despite everything, he smiled. Fine. Send a car. Thursday arrived faster than Caleb wanted. He spent the day at the office, interviewing candidates for the case manager position. Lena sat in on the meetings, asking pointed questions while Caleb mostly tried to assess whether these people actually cared about the work or just needed a job. The third candidate, a woman named Simone Chen, who'd spent 5 years at the Coalition for the Homeless, talked about her own family's experience with housing instability. Her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them in a rent-stabilized apartment. Simone had gone into social work specifically because she remembered what it felt like to be one missed paycheck away from losing everything. I'm not here because I need a position, she said. I'm here because I read about your program, and I want to be part of something that actually works. After she left, Lena looked at Caleb. Her. Agreed. Can we afford her? With Naomi's bridge funding? Absolutely. They called Simone that afternoon and offered her the position. She accepted immediately. One small victory in a week of complications. The car Naomi sent was excessive, a black sedan with a driver who called Caleb Sir, and opened doors like he was transporting royalty. Caleb spent the ride to the River Club trying not to feel like an imposter, trying to remember Naomi's words about showing up versus performing. The dinner was in a private room overlooking the East River, 12 people seated at a table set with more silverware than Caleb knew how to use. Naomi greeted him at the door, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. You came, she said. You sent a very insistent car. I'm good at being insistent. She guided him into the room. Everyone here knows who you are. Just be yourself. The evening passed in a blur of conversations Caleb only half-tracked. The woman to his left ran a foundation focused on criminal justice reform. The man across from him oversaw educational grants. They asked about his program, about his approach to family placement, about the challenges of working within broken systems. Caleb answered honestly, talked about the families they'd helped and the dozens still waiting, talked about the bureaucratic nightmares and the funding gaps and the fact that the city's shelter system was designed to process people, not help them. You're frustrated with the system, one of the directors observed. I'm frustrated that we accept the system as an excuse for failure, Caleb replied. Housing isn't complicated. People need stable places to live. But we've built these elaborate barriers that protect property values and investment portfolios while families sleep in cars. That's a radical position. It's a human position. The radical part is that we've normalized the alternative. Across the table, Naomi was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. After dinner, she pulled him aside while others filtered out to the balcony. You were good in there. I was honest. Same thing for you. She handed him a folder. 3 foundations represented at this dinner have committed to reviewing funding proposals for your program. Collectively, they could provide $200,000 annually if the proposals are strong. Caleb stared at the folder. How did you? Because you made them believe. Not in charity, but in effectiveness. That's what they fund. Naomi, I don't know how to thank you for. Then don't. Just keep doing the work. She paused. Gerard called me earlier. The documentation from France is coming together. He thinks you have a strong case. But Margot Beaumont's lawyers are arguing that American possession of the ring is irrelevant under French law, that the trust should be divided equally among all verified descendants regardless of artifact ownership. Can they do that? They can argue it. Whether they'll win is another question. Naomi met his eyes. This is going to get complicated before it gets simple. Are you ready for that? Caleb thought about Vanessa's apology, Marcus's frivolous lawsuit, the media coverage and the scrutiny and the constant feeling that his life was on display. I don't think I have a choice. You always have a choice. The question is what you're willing to fight for. On the drive home, Caleb looked at the ring on his hand, at the city lights blurring past the window, at the folder full of funding possibilities. He thought about his grandfather wearing this ring while building affordable housing, about Henri Mercier fleeing France with whatever he could carry, about all the choices that had led to this moment. The car pulled up to his building, the shabby entrance, the broken intercom, the reality of his actual life away from foundation dinners and private rooms overlooking the river. "Thank you," he told the driver. "My pleasure, sir." Caleb climbed the stairs to his apartment, let himself in quietly so he wouldn't wake Lily, and stood in the small kitchen thinking about what it meant to keep fighting. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because the alternative was giving up on everything his family had preserved. His phone buzzed. Gerard Fontaine, emailing at midnight Paris time. "Mr. Mercer, we have located immigration records for Claire Mercier's arrival in New York, 1942. She listed the ring specifically on customs documentation as a family heirloom valued at $200 for insurance purposes. This establishes clear chain of custody and intent to preserve. Combined with the Cartier authentication, your claim strengthens considerably. Margot's team will struggle to overcome this. Well done. GF." Caleb read the email twice, feeling something tight in his chest finally loosen. He walked to Lily's room, stood in her doorway watching her sleep, and made a promise he intended to keep. "We're going to win this," he whispered. "Not because we deserve it more than anyone else, but because we're not giving up. Not on this legacy. Not on this work. Not on each other." The ring caught the hallway light, steady and sure. And for the first time in weeks, Caleb Mercer believed his own words. The immigration records changed everything, but not in the way Caleb had expected. Gerard's discovery meant the legal case strengthened, yes, but it also meant the story went viral in ways that made the Times article look like a footnote. By Friday morning, 3 French publications had picked up the narrative: Master Jeweler's legacy, family separated by war, precious heirloom surviving decades of hardship only to become the center of an international legal battle. By Friday afternoon, CNN had called requesting an interview. Caleb stood in the church basement office, staring at his phone while Lena paced behind him like a caged animal. "You have to do it," she said for the 3rd time. "I don't have to do anything." "Caleb, this is international coverage. Do you understand what that means for the program? For funding? For legitimacy? It also means my entire life becomes public consumption. Lily's life, my grandfather's history, everything. It's already public. The only question is whether you control the narrative or let other people control it for you." Simone, who'd started her first day that morning and was currently buried in intake files, looked up. "For what it's worth, I'd want to hear this story from you, not from some reporter who's just chasing clicks." Caleb met her eyes. "You've been here 6 hours and you're already giving opinions?" "I'm efficient," she smiled slightly, "but seriously. If this story is going to be told anyway, you should be the one telling it." He called the CNN producer back. Scheduled the interview for Monday. Tried not to think about the fact that millions of people would be watching him discuss the divorce, the ring, the financial desperation he'd been living with for months. That evening, Vanessa called. Not Marcus, not her lawyer, Vanessa herself. "I saw the news," she said without preamble. "About the French claim and the immigration records. What about it?" "Marcus is dropping his legal challenge." Caleb stopped mid-step in his apartment. "What?" "His lawyers told him it's unwinnable. The documentation is too strong, and apparently his firm is concerned about publicity, something about looking like he's bullying a single father for international sympathy points." Her voice was tight. "He's furious. Thinks I sabotaged him by talking to you." "Did you?" "No. But I'm not sorry it worked out this way." A pause. "Caleb, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but can we talk? Not about the settlement, about Lily." His stomach dropped. "What about Lily?" "She asked me yesterday if you were famous now, because kids at preschool were talking about seeing your picture in the newspaper." Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know how to answer her." "You tell her the truth, that I'm not famous, that I'm just trying to help people, and sometimes that means being in the news." "She also asked if you were going to move away." Caleb closed his eyes. Why would she think that? Because in her 4-year-old brain, when people get on TV and in newspapers, they go to different places. She's worried you're going to disappear. I would never. I know that. But she doesn't understand the difference between news coverage and actually leaving. She just knows you're suddenly everywhere except with her as much as you used to be. The guilt hit like a physical blow. Between the legal complications and the foundation meetings and the constant interviews, Caleb had missed 2 bedtimes this week, had been distracted during the time they did spend together, had let his attention fracture in ways that a 4-year-old would absolutely notice. "Can I talk to her?" he asked quietly. "She's asleep, but tomorrow's my day with her. Maybe you could come by in the morning, before she goes to ballet. Just be present for a bit?" "Yeah, I can do that." After hanging up, Caleb sat in the dark apartment, feeling the weight of every choice compounding. He was fighting for his family's legacy while potentially neglecting the family member who actually needed him. He was building something that could help dozens of families while his own daughter worried he was disappearing. The ring felt heavy on his finger. Saturday morning, he showed up at Vanessa's apartment in Tribeca, the sleek, expensive space Marcus had bought her, all marble counters and floor-to-ceiling windows. Lily answered the door in her ballet outfit, her face transforming when she saw him. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him with enough force to knock him back a step. "Hey, Lily Bean, I heard you've been worried about me." She buried her face in his shoulder. "Are you going away?" "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. I promise." "But you're on TV." "Sometimes, yeah. But that doesn't mean I'm leaving. It just means people want to hear about the work I do, about helping families find homes." "Like our home?" "Sort of, except for families who don't have homes yet." Lily pulled back to look at him seriously. "That's sad." "It is, which is why I'm trying to help. But you're still my daddy. Always. No matter what. Even if I'm on TV or in the newspaper or anywhere else, I'm still your daddy. That never changes." She hugged him again, tighter this time. Vanessa stood in the doorway to the kitchen, watching with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. He spent the next hour just being present, helped Lily practice her plays, read her favorite book about a caterpillar who ate too much, tied her ballet shoes with the specific knot she insisted was the only correct way. Normal dad things that felt more important than any foundation dinner or media interview. When it was time to take her to ballet, Vanessa walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "She's my daughter. I don't need thanks for showing up." "I know, but I appreciate it anyway." Vanessa hesitated. "Marcus and I are taking a break." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry?" "Don't be. It's probably overdue." She looked at him directly. "He wanted me to keep pushing about the ring, said I was being weak by backing down, that we could still find an angle if I testified that you'd been deceptive during the marriage." And I told him if he couldn't understand why I wouldn't lie about you in court, then he didn't understand me at all. She smiled sadly. Turns out he didn't. "Vanessa, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just telling you that I'm starting to understand what I gave up, and I'm trying to make sure Lily doesn't lose what I lost." After he left, Caleb walked 20 blocks before catching the subway, trying to process the conversation. Vanessa was changing, or maybe just revealing who she'd been underneath the ambition and the dissatisfaction. Either way, it complicated the neat narrative of villain and victim he'd been carrying. People weren't that simple. Marriages weren't that simple. And maybe that was the hardest part, accepting that both of them had failed in different ways, and neither version erased the other. Monday's CNN interview took place in a studio in Midtown, all bright lights and makeup artists who kept trying to powder Caleb's face while he fidgeted. The anchor, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd covered housing policy for years, greeted him warmly, but with the kind of professional distance that made clear this wasn't a puff piece. "We're live in 3 minutes," the producer said. "Just answer honestly and try not to look directly at the camera." "What if I have no idea what I'm doing?" "Then you'll be authentic. People appreciate authentic." The interview started with the basics. Patricia asked about the housing program, about how Caleb had gotten started, about the families they'd helped. Standard questions he could answer without his heart rate spiking. Then she shifted. "Your ex-wife tried to claim the ring during your divorce," Patricia said, not unkindly, but not gently either. "She's been quoted saying you prioritize this work over your marriage. How do you respond to that?" Caleb took a breath. "I think we both made mistakes. I worked too much. She wanted a different life than I could provide. Sometimes marriages end not because someone's a villain, but because two people grow in different directions. But the ring became a symbol of that conflict. The ring became a symbol of what we valued differently. To her, it represented money I was withholding. To me, it represented my grandfather's legacy. We were both right and both wrong. And now that legacy is worth potentially millions. Now that legacy is a responsibility to honor where it came from and what it cost my family to preserve it. Patricia leaned forward slightly. There's a competing claim from France, Margot Beaumont, who says her lineage is equally valid. How do you respond to critics who say you're claiming sole ownership of something that should be shared? I'm not claiming sole ownership of the history. That belongs to everyone descended from Henri Mercier. But the ring was passed down through my family specifically. It was given to my grandfather, then to me, with the instruction to preserve it. If the courts decide it should be shared, I'll respect that. But I'm not going to apologize for honoring what my grandfather asked me to do. Even if it means a legal battle that could take years? Even then. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, covering the trust claim, the program's expansion, Caleb's vision for sustainable housing solutions. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, Caleb felt wrung out, like he'd run a marathon while being psychoanalyzed. You did well, Patricia said afterward, shaking his hand. Most people freeze up or get defensive. You stayed human. I didn't have much choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose honesty. It shows. The interview aired that evening. Caleb watched it from his apartment with Lily asleep in the next room, seeing himself on screen and barely recognizing the calm, articulate person talking about family and legacy and responsibility. He looked tired but steady, worn down but not broken. His phone exploded before the segment even finished. Lena sent 7 crying face emojis and a message. You were perfect. Naomi texted, well done. Foundation calls are already coming in. Even his mother called, her voice thick with emotion, saying his grandfather would have been proud. But the message that hit hardest came from an unknown number. Watching your interview, you spoke about my great-grandfather with respect. I appreciate that. Perhaps we can find a solution that honors both our families. Margot Beaumont. Caleb stared at the message for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Gerard with a simple question. Is this real? Gerard's response came immediately. Very real. I've been in preliminary discussions with her counsel. She saw the CNN interview and it shifted her perspective. She doesn't want to fight. She wants acknowledgement. We should talk. The call with Gerard happened Tuesday morning. Margot Beaumont was 53, a teacher in Lyon, never married, no children. Her branch of the family had stayed in France after the war, rebuilt their lives there, but always carried the knowledge that pieces of Henri's collection had been lost or taken to America. She'd filed the claim not out of greed, but out of a desire to connect with that history. She's proposed a compromise, Gerard explained. She withdraws her challenge to the ring and your primary claim to the American portion of the trust. In exchange, you acknowledge her lineage publicly and agree to share documentation about Henri's life and work. She wants the family history preserved, not the money. What about the trust funds? She's asking for 20%. The rest would be yours. Her lawyers think it's fair given that her documentation is weaker, but her lineage is legitimate. Caleb did the math. 20% of 1.7 million was 340,000, leaving him with 1.36 million, still more money than he'd ever imagined having, still enough to change everything. What do you think? He asked. I think it's a reasonable offer from someone who could make this process much more expensive and painful if she wanted to fight. I also think there's value in having family in France who can help with additional documentation if we need it. Can I talk to her directly? I can arrange a call. The conversation with Margot Beaumont happened Wednesday evening, Caleb sitting in his small kitchen with his laptop open to a video call, watching a woman who had his grandfather's eyes appear on screen. Mr. Mercer, she said in careful English. Thank you for speaking with me. Thank you for reaching out. Your message after the interview, I wasn't expecting that. I watched you speak about Henri with such care, like he mattered not just as a name in legal documents, but as a person. That is rare in these cases. She smiled slightly. My grandmother spoke of him often, how he could make anything beautiful, how he believed objects should carry meaning, not just value. My grandfather said something similar, that the ring mattered because of what it survived, not what it cost. They would have understood each other, I think. They talked for over an hour. About Henri's workshop in Paris, about the pieces he'd created, about the family members lost during the war. Margot shared photographs. Henri as a young man, his hands covered in silver dust. Claire before she fled, holding an infant Samuel. Caleb shared what little he knew from his grandfather's stories. By the end of the call, the legal claim felt less like a battle and more like a bridge. I will accept the compromise, Caleb said. 20% is fair. More than fair, considering you're giving me the space to establish the primary claim. And you will share the documentation, the photographs, the history? All of it. This shouldn't be my story alone, it's ours. After they disconnected, Caleb sat in the quiet apartment feeling something shift. The fight he'd been bracing for had transformed into something else entirely. Not conflict, but connection. Two branches of a family separated by an ocean and 70 years, finding their way back to each other through a ring that had survived everything designed to destroy it. He called Gerard. Tell our lawyers we accept the terms. Draft whatever needs to be signed. This is a good decision, Caleb, pragmatic and decent. It's the right decision, which isn't always the same thing. Thursday brought a different kind of challenge. Martin Vreeland called with news that Marcus Hastings, despite dropping his legal motion, had given an interview to a financial podcast discussing the ethics of inherited wealth and concealed assets in divorce proceedings. He never mentioned Caleb by name, but the implications were clear. He's trying to salvage his reputation by painting himself as a principled voice, Martin explained. It's petty and transparent, but it might get picked up by other outlets. Let him talk, Caleb said. I'm done responding to every person who has an opinion about my life. That's mature of you. That's exhaustion. There's a difference. But the podcast did get picked up. By Friday, several financial blogs were running think pieces about divorce asset disclosure and the gray areas of valuation. Caleb's name appeared in most of them, usually paired with words like questionable and convenient timing. Naomi called that afternoon, her voice tight with controlled anger. I'm having my PR team draft a response. This narrative that you somehow manipulated the system is garbage, and we're not letting it stand. Naomi, I appreciate it, but nothing. You disclosed everything properly. You acted in good faith, and some venture capitalist with wounded pride doesn't get to rewrite that story because his girlfriend dumped him. Vanessa didn't dump him. They're on a break. Same thing, different PR spin. The point is, we're not letting Marcus control this narrative. What are you going to do? What I do best. Apply pressure until he remembers why picking fights with people I'm protecting is a bad idea. Caleb should have objected, should have insisted on handling his own battles. But he was tired, and Naomi was right. Sometimes you needed someone with more power to even the field. Do what you think is necessary, he said quietly. Already done. By Monday, Marcus Hastings is going to be much more interested in staying quiet than continuing his podcast tour. She was right. By Monday morning, Marcus had issued a terse statement through his publicist. Recent commentary was not directed at any specific individual. I regret any confusion and consider the matter closed. Lena called the moment she saw it. What did Naomi do? I didn't ask, and she didn't tell. Remind me to never make her angry. I think that's good life advice generally. The program was transforming in ways Caleb struggled to process. With Simone handling case management and a new intake coordinator named David, who understood database systems, the operation was actually becoming professional. They'd moved from the church basement to a small office space on Amsterdam Avenue. Nothing fancy, but clean, with actual furniture and a door that locked. The waiting list that had been stagnant for months was moving again. Families were getting housed. Caleb should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt untethered, like he'd spent so long struggling that he didn't know how to function without the constant crisis. This is normal, Lena said when he mentioned it. You're not in survival mode anymore. It feels weird because you've been in fight or flight for years. How do I stop feeling like it's all going to collapse? Time. Therapy. Probably both. She looked at him seriously. Caleb, you did it. The program is stable. You have funding. You have staff. At some point, you have to accept that you succeeded. But success felt slippery. The trust money was still months away, still dependent on French courts and legal processes Caleb barely understood. The ring was still the center of international attention, and Lily had started having nightmares about Daddy being on TV and disappearing into the screen. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a regular custody exchange with Vanessa. She opened the door of her Tribeca apartment looking exhausted, her usual polish replaced by something raw. "She's been asking about the ring," Vanessa said without greeting. "Wants to know if it's magic because everyone's talking about it." "What did you tell her?" "That it's special because it belonged to your family." "But she's 4. She's decided it's like the ring in that Lord of the Rings movie I accidentally let her watch 5 minutes of before realizing it was completely inappropriate." Despite everything, Caleb laughed. "So I'm Frodo now?" "Apparently, and I'm—" Vanessa paused. "I don't know who I am in this story. The person who didn't see what mattered until it was too late?" Vanessa. "No, let me say this." She stepped out into the hallway, lowering her voice. "I've been thinking about what you said at the cafe, about not being able to absolve me. You were right, but I need you to know I'm trying to do better. Not for us. We're done. But for Lily. And maybe for myself." "What does that mean?" "It means I told Marcus to stop the podcast appearances. Told him if he wanted any future with me, he needed to stop trying to destroy you. He chose the media attention." She shrugged. "Turns out, I'm finally learning what matters." Caleb didn't know what to say. The woman standing in front of him looked like Vanessa, but sounded like someone he'd never quite met. Someone tired of performing, tired of chasing validation through other people's perception of success. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, finally. "I hope I stop looking and start building, like you did." She managed a small smile. "Lily's ready. She made you a picture. Something about a magic ring and a dragon." The picture was taped to his refrigerator within an hour of getting home, a chaotic swirl of crayons showing a stick figure with a ring fighting a purple dragon. Caleb studied it while making dinner, this physical evidence that his daughter was processing his life through the lens of fairy tales. Maybe that was healthier than the truth. That the real dragons were legal complications and media scrutiny and the slow, grinding work of building something sustainable from nothing. His phone rang. "Naomi." "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "Should I be?" "Probably. I just got off the phone with 3 separate foundations who were at that dinner. Between them, they're committing $400,000 annually for the next 3 years. Renewable if outcomes stay strong." Caleb sat down. $400,000 annually, as in every year. As in you can stop worrying about whether the program survives and start thinking about what it becomes. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll hire the staff you need. Say you'll expand to Brooklyn. Say you'll stop carrying everything alone because you finally have the resources not to." "Naomi, why are you doing this?" "Because someone needs to. And because watching you build something real while everyone doubted you has been the most satisfying investment I've made in years." Her voice softened. "Also because you remind me that the work matters more than the recognition. I needed that reminder." After the call ended, Caleb sat in his small kitchen with Lily's dragon picture on the refrigerator and funding commitments that meant the program could help hundreds of families instead of dozens. He thought about his grandfather building homes while wearing a fortune he never acknowledged, about Henri creating beauty while fleeing destruction, about all the ways people survived by focusing on what they could build instead of what they'd lost. The ring caught the overhead light, worn smooth by generations of hands that had refused to give up. And Caleb Mercer finally understood that he wasn't fighting to prove he deserved this legacy. He was living it. The choice his ancestors had made, to create, to build, to persist, wasn't something he needed permission to claim. It was already his. Had been all along. Now he just needed the courage to believe it. The courage arrived in pieces over the following weeks, not as a sudden transformation, but as a series of small decisions that accumulated into something that felt like solid ground. Caleb hired 2 more staff members, signed a lease on a larger office space in Brooklyn that could handle twice their current caseload, started sleeping more than 5 hours a night. Small things that added up to a life that no longer felt like it was being held together with borrowed hope and spite. March came cold and bright, the kind of weather that made New York feel scrubbed clean. Caleb was walking Lily to preschool on a Wednesday morning when his phone rang with a Paris number. Gerard Fontaine, calling at what had to be nearly evening in France. "I have news," Gerard said without preamble. "The French court has ruled on the trust claim. You've been granted primary beneficiary status, with Margot Beaumont receiving the agreed 20%. The funds will be released within 60 days pending final documentation." Caleb stopped walking so abruptly that Lily tugged his hand impatiently. "Daddy, we're going to be late." "Just a second, sweetheart." Into the phone. 60 days? That's it? That's it. Margot's cooperation made the process remarkably smooth. The court appreciated that both parties were more interested in preserving family history than fighting over money. Gerard's voice warmed slightly. "Congratulations, Caleb. Your grandfather's legacy is officially yours." After hanging up, Caleb stood on the sidewalk trying to process the fact that the battle he'd been bracing for was over. Not with drama or last-minute reversals, but with a quiet ruling from a French court that acknowledged what Henri Mercier had built and what his descendants deserved to inherit. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Lily was watching him with her too perceptive 4-year-old eyes. "Nothing's wrong, Lily Bean. Something very good just happened." "Did you win?" The question was more complicated than she knew. "Yeah, I think we did." "Like beating the dragon?" Caleb thought about all the dragons he'd been fighting: poverty, doubt, his ex-wife's scorn, the constant fear that he wasn't enough. "Yeah, like beating the dragon." She threw her arms around his legs in celebration, nearly knocking him over, and Caleb felt something in his chest crack open. Relief, maybe, or joy, or just the simple realization that sometimes, against all reasonable expectation, things actually worked out. He called Lena from outside the preschool after dropping Lily off. She answered with her usual efficiency. "What's wrong?" "Why does something have to be wrong?" "Because you never call before 9 a.m. unless there's a crisis." "The French court ruled the trust is mine. Well, 80% mine. Funds release in 60 days. Silence. "Then, are you serious right now?" "Completely serious." Caleb, do you understand what this means?" "I have a pretty good idea." "No, I don't think you do. This means the program is funded for a decade. This means we can expand to Queens and the Bronx. This means you never have to choose between paying rent and helping a family again." Her voice broke slightly. "This means you won." "We won," Caleb corrected. "None of this happens without you." "Damn right it doesn't. I want a raise." "Done." "I wasn't actually—" "Lena, I'm about to have $1.3 million. You're getting a raise. Everyone's getting a raise. We're getting the office that doesn't smell like mildew and actually has working heat." She laughed, the sound edged with something that might have been tears. "I need to sit down." "Go sit down. I'll be at the office in an hour. We have planning to do." But before he could focus on planning, there was one call he needed to make. Caleb found a quiet bench in Riverside Park and dialed Naomi Ashford. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me Gerard called you." "How do you already know?" "Because he called me 5 minutes after calling you. I'm listed as a character witness in your documentation. Professional courtesy." A pause. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, terrified. That's natural. Money changes things. I don't want it to change who I am. It won't if you don't let it. But Caleb, you're allowed to let it change your circumstances. You're allowed to stop struggling." "I don't know how to do that. Struggling is all I've known for 3 years." "Then you learn. Same way you learned everything else, by showing up and doing the work." Naomi's voice softened. "I'm proud of you. I know that's probably strange to hear from someone who's essentially a stranger, but it's true. You could have given up 100 times. You didn't. I had help. Everyone needs help. The difference is you accepted it instead of drowning in pride. That matters." After they hung up, Caleb sat watching the Hudson River, thinking about what it meant to accept help, to believe he deserved the opportunities appearing in front of him, to stop apologizing for taking up space. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Lily told me you beat the dragon. I'm assuming that means the court ruling came through? Congratulations. Truly." Caleb stared at the message. 6 months ago, Vanessa would have found a way to make this about what he should have done differently. Now she was offering congratulations without caveat or criticism. He typed back, "Thank you." And thank you for backing off the legal challenges. It made a difference. Her response came quickly. I should have done it sooner. I'm learning that protecting my ego isn't worth destroying someone else's peace. Slow learner, but I'm getting there. The office space in Brooklyn was chaos when Caleb arrived. Lena had apparently told everyone about the court ruling because Simone and David were there, despite it being their day off, along with 3 volunteers and 2 clients who'd been in the middle of intake appointments. Someone had brought bagels. Someone else had made a banner that read, "We beat the dragon," in Lily's handwriting, which meant Lena had texted with Vanessa to coordinate. Speech! Lena demanded the moment Caleb walked in. I don't have a speech prepared. Make one up. You're good at that. Caleb looked around the cramped office at the people who'd believed in this work, when it was nothing but a basement operation and borrowed furniture. At the families they'd helped, and the families still waiting for help. At the possibility of actually building something sustainable instead of constantly triaging emergencies. I don't know what to say except thank you, he started. This was never just my work. It was all of ours. And whatever happens next, expansion, new programs, better resources, it belongs to all of us. We did this together. Simone raised her coffee cup. To doing it together. And to never working in a basement again, David added. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Lena had spreadsheets, of course she had spreadsheets, outlining potential expansion scenarios, staffing needs, partnership opportunities with other housing organizations. David presented a database system that could track every family they worked with, every placement, every outcome. Simone talked about preventative programs that could catch families before they lost housing instead of only helping after crisis hit. It was overwhelming and energizing and exactly what Caleb had been working toward without quite believing it would happen. By afternoon, his phone was ringing constantly. 3 reporters requesting interviews about the court ruling, 2 foundation directors wanting to discuss expanded partnerships, a literary agent who thought his story would make a compelling memoir about overcoming adversity and fighting for family legacy. Caleb ignored most of it, let the calls go to voicemail. He'd learned that not every opportunity required his immediate attention, that sometimes the most important thing was staying present for the work, instead of performing success for people who wanted to monetize his struggle. But there was one call he took. Martin Vreeland, his estate attorney. The trust funds will be transferred to an account in your name within 45 days, Martin explained. After taxes, you're looking at approximately $1,060,000. I strongly recommend you meet with a financial advisor to discuss investment strategy and long-term planning. I just need it to be stable, to know it's there for Lily and for the program. Then we'll set it up that way. Trust funds for Lily's future, operational budget for the program, personal emergency fund for you. The rest can be conservatively invested. You'll never be wealthy by Manhattan standards, but you'll never struggle again either. That sounds perfect. Caleb, you should also know the ring itself has appreciated in value. The publicity around the case has made it even more desirable to collectors. Current estimates put it around $1,200,000. Caleb looked at his hand, at the worn gold band that had survived war and displacement and 3 generations of his family refusing to give up. I'm not selling it. I didn't think you would, but you should insure it properly. And probably put it in a safety deposit box instead of wearing it daily. I'll think about it. But he knew he wouldn't sell it, wouldn't lock it away. The ring had survived because it was worn, used, kept close to the people it was meant to protect. Putting it in a box felt like betraying everything it represented. That evening, Caleb picked up Lily from Vanessa's apartment for his custody days. Vanessa answered the door looking different somehow, softer, less armored. She's been telling everyone at preschool that her daddy has a magic ring, Vanessa said. Her teacher asked if she meant you were getting remarried. I had to explain about your grandfather and the family history. Pretty sure I confused her more. I'll talk to the teacher. It's fine. Let her think it's magic. She's 4. She should believe in magic. Vanessa stepped aside to let him in. Can we talk for a minute while Lily's getting her things together? They sat in her living room, the space Marcus had bought. Though there was no sign of him now, no jacket on the hook, no shoes by the door, no evidence that anyone but Vanessa and Lily lived there. He's really gone? Caleb asked. Completely. Turns out when you tell a man you won't compromise your integrity for his ego, he finds someone who will. She didn't sound particularly upset about it. I'm learning to be okay alone. It's harder than I thought it would be. Yeah, it is. How did you do it? After the divorce, after everything fell apart, how did you just keep going? Caleb thought about the question. I didn't have a choice. Lily needed me. The families I was helping needed me. And I guess somewhere along the way, I started believing I needed me too, that I deserved to build something even if no one was watching. I'm watching now. Vanessa met his eyes. I see what you built. And I'm sorry it took losing you to understand what that meant. Vanessa, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. She stood up, signaling the conversation was ending. Lily's bag is by the door. She wants to show you the art project she made. Something about butterflies and castles. I didn't follow the logic. Lily emerged from a room carrying a construction paper castle covered in glitter and cotton ball clouds. Look, Daddy, it's where the magic ring lives. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we hang it in our house? Absolutely. On the subway ride back to Washington Heights, Lily fell asleep against his shoulder, her castle clutched in one hand. Caleb looked at the ring on his finger, at his daughter trusting him to get her home safely, at the castle that represented her 4-year-old understanding of what they'd been fighting for. Maybe she understood better than anyone. The magic wasn't in the ring itself. It was in what the ring represented. Family that refused to disappear. Legacy built through persistence. The radical act of believing you deserve to build something beautiful even when the world tried to convince you otherwise. The following weeks moved with the strange momentum of plans becoming reality. The lease on the new office space in Brooklyn was signed, a full floor in a renovated building with actual conference rooms and windows that opened. Caleb hired 3 more case managers, 2 intake specialists, and a grants coordinator whose only job was securing additional funding so they never returned to survival mode. They partnered with 2 other housing organizations to share resources and referrals, suddenly part of a network instead of operating in isolation. The program that had barely survived in a church basement was becoming an actual organization. Lily started kindergarten in September, the first day arriving with brutal speed. Caleb walked her to PS 175, her backpack almost as big as she was, and tried not to cry when she ran toward the playground without looking back. They grow up fast, another parent said, watching her own child disappear into the building. Too fast, Caleb agreed. His phone buzzed. Naomi Ashford. First day of school is hard on parents. Coffee after drop-off? He met her at a cafe on Broadway, the kind of place that served expensive lattes and had too many Brooklyn transplants working on screenplays. Naomi was already there, dressed in casual clothes that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly grocery budget, but somehow looked effortless. You survived, she observed as he sat down. Barely. She didn't even wave goodbye. That's good. Means she's confident. You did that. They drank coffee in comfortable silence for a moment. Caleb had grown used to Naomi's presence over the past 6 months. The way she offered support without making it feel like charity. The way she believed in his work without needing him to perform gratitude. I have a proposition, Naomi said eventually. The foundation is launching a new initiative around community-based housing solutions. I want you to lead it. Caleb set down his cup. What does that mean? It means taking everything you've built with your program and scaling it nationally. We'd provide funding, infrastructure, support. You'd provide the vision and the expertise. It would be full-time, significant salary, real resources. Naomi, I already run the program. You run one program in 2 boroughs of New York. This would be 20 programs in 10 cities. It would be building a model that other organizations could replicate. It would be changing policy instead of just navigating around it. The scope of what she was proposing made Caleb's head spin. That's massive. It is. And you're the only person I trust to do it right. Not because you need the money, you don't anymore, but because you actually care about the work more than the recognition. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. But Caleb, at some point you have to accept that you're not just surviving anymore. You're building something that could outlast both of us. That's worth considering. He thought about her words while walking home through Riverside Park, watching the Hudson River reflect afternoon light. For 3 years, he'd measured success in terms of immediate survival, making rent, helping one more family, getting through one more crisis. The idea of thinking in terms of decades, of national impact, of building systems instead of just fighting them, it felt presumptuous and terrifying and maybe exactly right. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with the ring on his finger and a decision to make. The apartment was the same cramped space he'd moved into after the divorce, but it felt different now. Not because of the money, most of which sat untouched in accounts allocated for Lily and the program, but because it was a choice instead of the only option. He could afford to move, could buy a place with a second bedroom that was actually a bedroom instead of a converted closet, could live somewhere with functional heat and windows that didn't rattle. But this apartment was where he'd rebuilt his life, where he'd learned to be enough for himself and his daughter, where he'd stopped apologizing for existing. Moving felt like erasing that. His phone rang. Margot Beaumont, calling from Lyon. They'd developed a habit of talking every few weeks, sharing family stories and photographs, building connection across an ocean. "Caleb, I have something to show you," she said after greetings were exchanged. "I found a letter from Henri de Clare written just before she left France. I've translated it. May I read it to you?" "Please." Margot's voice was quiet as she read, "My dearest daughter, you carry more than objects when you go. You carry our name, our work, our refusal to be erased. The pieces I've given you are valuable, yes, but their worth is not in what they cost. It is in what they survived. Wear them, use them. Let them remind you that beauty persists even when the world tries to destroy it. Build something in America that we could not build here. And tell your children that they come from people who made beautiful things in terrible times. That is the only inheritance that matters." Caleb's throat tightened. "Thank you for sharing that. I thought you should know what Henri wanted. Not money, not recognition. Just for his family to keep making beautiful things." She paused. "You're doing that, Caleb. With your housing work. You're making something beautiful in terrible times." After they hung up, Caleb looked at the ring with new understanding. Henri hadn't created it to be locked away or sold. He'd created it to be worn, used, passed down to people who would understand that value wasn't measured in dollars, but in what you built with your life. The next morning, Caleb called Naomi. "I'll do it. The national initiative, but on one condition. Name it. Lena comes with me as deputy director, and we hire locally in every city we expand to. No parachuting in experts. We find people already doing the work and give them resources." "Done. When can you start?" "After I find someone to take over daily operations in New York. The program needs to survive without me." "It will. You built it right." The transition took 3 months. Caleb hired a brilliant woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who'd been running a smaller housing program in Harlem and understood both the work and the systems they were fighting. He spent weeks training her, introducing her to every family, every partner organization, every funding source, making sure his departure wouldn't collapse what they'd built. On his last official day at the New York office, the staff threw him a party. Not a sad goodbye, but a celebration of what came next. Simone presented him with a framed photo of their first office in the church basement, a reminder of how far they'd come. David gave him a flash drive containing every family's story, every placement success, every small victory. "Don't forget us when you're changing policy in D.C., Simone said. "I'm not going to D.C. The Foundation's office is in New York. I'm just traveling more." "Still, don't forget where you started." "Impossible. You're all going to be calling me asking for advice." "Damn right we are," Lena said, appearing with champagne. "Now shut up and let us toast you." Patricia raised her glass. "To Caleb Mercer, who proved that one person with a church basement and too much stubbornness can actually change things." "To changing things," everyone echoed. December arrived with the first real snow, the kind that made Manhattan look like a postcard instead of a city. Caleb had just returned from visiting a potential program site in Chicago when Naomi called asking if he was free for dinner. "Nothing official," she added, "just dinner." They met at a small Italian place in the West Village, the kind of restaurant that had been there for 40 years and didn't care about trends. Naomi was already seated when Caleb arrived, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual professional armor. "This feels suspiciously like a date," Caleb observed as he sat down. "Would that be a problem?" I don't know. Is it a date? I'm not sure yet. I thought we could eat dinner and figure it out. Naomi smiled slightly. I don't usually mix professional and personal, but you're not really professional anymore. You're a colleague, and maybe a friend, and possibly something else if we're both being honest. Caleb felt his heart rate spike. Naomi, you're you. I'm barely holding my life together on a good day. You're running a national housing initiative, raising a daughter mostly on your own, and managing international family legacy claims. I think you're doing more than barely holding together. You know what I mean. You're successful, put together. You could be with anyone. I could be, but I keep choosing to spend time with you. Doesn't that tell you something? They ordered food, talked about the work, about Lily's adjustment to kindergarten, about Margot's upcoming visit to New York in the spring, safe topics that danced around the real question hanging between them. Finally, over dessert, Naomi reached across the table and took his hand, the one wearing the ring. I'm not asking you to have everything figured out, she said quietly. I'm just asking if you'd be interested in figuring it out together, slowly. No pressure, just seeing what this could be. Caleb looked at their joined hands, at the ring that had brought them together, at the woman who'd seen him at his lowest and decided he was worth investing in, not as charity, but as an equal. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. Good, because I've been thinking about this for months, and I was running out of professional excuses to spend time with you. They left the restaurant and walked through the snowy West Village, not quite dating, but not quite not dating, figuring out what shape this thing between them would take. Naomi told him about her childhood, the car she'd slept in, the teachers who'd believed in her, the scholarship that changed everything. Caleb told her about his grandfather, about the divorce, about the night he'd signed the papers and wondered if he'd ever feel whole again. You're whole now, Naomi said, stopping under a streetlight. I'm getting there. That's the same thing. She kissed him then, soft and careful, and Caleb felt something in him finally settle. Not fixed. He was still figuring out how to live without constant crisis, still learning to accept help, still terrified of somehow screwing this up, but whole enough, steady enough, ready enough. They walked to his apartment, snow falling steadily now, and Caleb realized he was happy. Not grateful or relieved or surviving, actually happy. The ring caught the streetlight, worn smooth by generations of hands that had refused to give up. Spring came with Margot's visit. Caleb met her at JFK with Lily, who'd been talking about her cousin from France for weeks, despite Margot being several removes from actual cousin. Margot emerged from customs looking exactly like her photographs, small, precise, with Henri's eyes and Claire's determined chin. Caleb? She embraced him like family, then crouched to Lily's level. And you must be Lily. Your father has told me so much about you. Do you know about the magic ring? Lily asked seriously. I do. It belonged to my great-grandfather, your great-great-great-grandfather. That's a lot of greats. It is. But the ring is greater still. They spent the week showing Margot New York, the Statue of Liberty that had greeted Claire in 1942, the Brooklyn neighborhoods where Samuel had built housing, the office where Caleb's program operated. Margot took hundreds of photographs, collected stories, built connection between past and present. On her last evening, they gathered at Caleb's apartment. Margot, Naomi, Lena, Lily, and Caleb, eating takeout and looking through all the documentation they'd assembled. Photographs of Henri's workshop, immigration papers, letters, the ring sitting in the center of the table, the physical link between all of it. Henri would be proud, Margot said quietly, not because of the money or the attention, but because his family is together, because we remembered. To remembering, Naomi said, raising her wine glass. And to building, Caleb added. That's what Henri wanted, for us to keep making beautiful things. After everyone left and Lily was asleep, Caleb stood at his window looking at the city. The apartment he'd lived in during his lowest point, the neighborhood he'd rebuilt his life in, the ring on his finger that had survived everything designed to destroy it. His phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Your family's story, your work, you. Thank you for all of it. Caleb typed back. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I see you now, and it's pretty great. He smiled at his phone. This woman who'd appeared at his worst moment and decided he was worth investing in. Who'd given him resources, yes, but more importantly had given him permission to believe he deserved them. The national initiative was expanding faster than projected. 8 cities now, 17 programs, hundreds of families housed. Caleb traveled constantly, but always came home to Lily, to Naomi, to the work that mattered. The trust money sat mostly untouched except for Lily's college fund and program operations. He still lived in the same apartment, still wore the same ring, still showed up to work like he had something to prove. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," Naomi told him one evening while they were cooking dinner in his cramped kitchen. "Old habits. Learn new ones. You're allowed to rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead." That's concerning on multiple levels. But she was smiling when she said it, and Caleb was learning, slowly, that rest wasn't giving up, that accepting success didn't mean abandoning the work, that he could be both the person who'd survived impossible circumstances and the person who'd built something lasting from them. A year after the gala that changed everything, the Ashford Foundation hosted another winter event. This time, Caleb arrived not as a surprise guest, but as deputy director of the National Housing Initiative. Not performing belonging, but actually belonging. Vanessa was there with a new partner, someone quieter than Marcus, kinder, who worked in education and didn't measure worth in portfolio value. She caught Caleb's eye across the ballroom and raised her glass in acknowledgement. Not friendship exactly, but mutual respect. Recognition that they'd both grown past who they'd been. Naomi found him near the windows overlooking Central Park, the same view he'd seen that first night when everything was uncertain. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Good. Great, actually." He took her hand. "Thank you for all of this." "You did the work, Caleb. I just opened a few doors." "You did more than that. You made me believe I deserved to walk through them." She kissed him, soft and sure, and Caleb thought about how much had changed in 12 months. The ring on his finger worth a fortune he'd never sell. The trust money securing his daughter's future. The program expanding nationally. The woman beside him who'd seen his potential when he'd lost sight of it himself. But the deepest change was internal. The knowledge that he wasn't fighting to prove himself anymore. Wasn't apologizing for existing. Wasn't waiting for permission to build something beautiful. He was already building it, had been all along. The ring caught the ballroom light, worn smooth by 3 generations of hands that had refused to disappear. Henri Mercier had fled Paris with whatever he could carry, determined his family would survive. Claire Mercier had arrived in New York with nothing but her father's tools and a fierce refusal to be erased. Samuel Mercer had built homes for working families while wearing a fortune he never acknowledged. And Caleb Mercer was continuing what they'd started, creating beauty in terrible times, making shelter for people the world had forgotten, proving that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money or jewelry or even legacy. It was the simple, radical act of showing up, of doing the work, of refusing to give up even when everything suggested you should. That was the magic ring's real power, not what it was worth in dollars or prestige or international attention, but what it represented. A family that had survived the unsurvivable by choosing again and again to build something that mattered. And as Caleb stood in that ballroom with Naomi's hand in his, the city glittering below them, his daughter safely asleep at home, and the work of helping families continuing in 8 cities across the country, he finally understood what his grandfather had been trying to tell him. The inheritance wasn't the ring itself. It was the choice to keep building, even when the world tried to break you. It was the refusal to let circumstance define your worth. It was showing up, day after day, for the work that mattered, and the people who depended on you. That was the legacy. That was what survived. And Caleb Mercer, single father, community housing advocate, man who'd been told repeatedly he wasn't enough, had inherited it fully. Not because he was perfect or brilliant or destined for greatness, but because when everything fell apart, he'd made the same choice his ancestors had made. He'd kept building. And in the end, that was the only magic that mattered.